Julie Berliner, Sweetgrass Kitchen, which is a edibles company out of Colorado, which grew from a single chocolate chip cookie recipe to a single strain grow, which provides all of the cannabis for her edibles company. She had a first kitchen, and now she's on to her second kitchen, and she continues to grow. Enjoy. So we have Julie Berliner from Sweetgrass Kitchen. Is that all right, Julie?
That's right. Yep.
Fantastic. Welcome. Thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And so I met you in Boulder, of all places, right?
Yes, I used to live in Boulder. I actually just recently moved to Denver, but I was there attending the Can Awards event. It was really cool to actually have something in Boulder and not in the city for a change.
Right, absolutely. That's why we did that. But you were in Boulder for a little bit. Take us through that time in your life.
Sure. So I actually went to CU Boulder, University of Colorado at Boulder. I started my college career in 2004 and graduated in 2008 with a degree in psychology and elementary education. So given, of course, that we were in a very great recession, I was the very enthusiastic substitute teacher without a job. So I graduated 2008, like I said, and was sort of presented with an opportunity as the medical marijuana market was opening up around that time. I had a really great recipe for chocolate chip cookies, the regular kind, and my friend had opened up a medical marijuana center around the corner from where I lived. So one day he came over and asked me to make some chocolate chip cookies for his store, and around this time it was very easy to just say, sure, why not? Because there were no regulations. House Bill 1284 was being developed, but it wasn't yet written in stone. So I was able to start my business very easily by baking out of my own home for just one shop with one recipe, which was, again, the original chocolate chip cookies.
Uh-huh. Was there a name for those original chocolate chip cookies?
The original name was the GG cookie. It was kind of a private white label cookie that I was making for the shop. As I also worked the reception area, I kind of did this on the side as well. So the original name was the GG cookie, and then right around April of 2010, things really started to change as far as House Bill 1284. There were a lot of regulations coming into play. I needed to either get a license and brand this thing and do it, or not. So I took a left turn there and have never looked back.
Aha. All right. Well, let's talk about how you might have been prepared for that type of decision. So you went for psych and elementary ed. How did that combination come to you in school?
Great question. Well, I've always had a passion for education, and I've certainly tried to incorporate that into my business model now. I developed an education card that was aimed specifically to the recreational consumer, and it helped them to understand what it means to consume edibles, what they need to know. But the reason I got into psychology, plain and simple, it was just really interesting to me. And again, education and being around kids and being around enthusiastic students, especially under a certain age range, was something I was very passionate about.
What? Yeah. Why were you so passionate about it, though? I understand. I mean, little kids are. Like my niece is 4 and my nephew's 2, and they're like really fun to hang out with. I get that, but I mean, to do for a living, how come?
Well, I really feel that especially when kids are young enough to go to school and really appreciate what they're doing, there's a certain enthusiasm that's there on the elementary level that may be lost as they get older. So I was really excited about the elementary piece. And I also saw that, education as a whole is, I should say, it absolutely is the foundation of our economy. I mean, teaching these kids from a very young age to be passionate about school will in turn, I think, affect us, all of us, in the future.
Well,
So I
absolutely.
truly did, yeah, I did it because I felt that it would make a difference, and that was the most important thing to me.
Got it. And then why did you attach psychology to that? Was that just to make sure you were doing everything correctly?
Well, you can be in the school of education, but you had to, elementary education wasn't a major in itself. So I had to major in psychology, but be in the school of education and take elementary education specific courses.
I
So
see. Oh,
it interests me. Yeah, so it was, it was just
so
an
it wasn't a
interesting kind
double
of,
major, or it was a double major?
I mean, technically, the amount of work that I had to do between the two, yes, it felt like a double major, but elementary education in itself was not considered a major.
Got it. Okay, and maybe that's part of the problem, Julie. And
Perhaps, yeah.
so, yeah. So were either of your parents educators?
Both my parents are actually doctors. My
Uh huh.
father's a radiologist, and my mother is a psychiatrist. Both
Uh
of them
huh.
came from overseas. Yep, they're that makes me and my sisters and I have all first generation Americans. So they certainly came a long way and fought very hard to get to where they are, especially here in America.
Well, when did they come over?
My mother, she was 11 years old when she came over from Hungary, and my father came over after medical school. I believe he was 26, 27 or so. So this is back in the, gosh, it must have been very early 80s, late 70s for my father
Hmm.
and mother. My mom actually went to medical school with my dad in France, where they met and then came back over here together.
Wait, so your dad's French?
Interesting. My father is Lebanese, born in Beirut, but we're a Jewish family. So he and his family were kind of run out of that country, and so he moved to France with his family. And although he looks very Lebanese, he has a very thick French accent. So it depends on on the day that you ask him.
Wow. Okay. There's a lot there. So what I mean, so this is a well-educated guy had tumult in Lebanon and went to France. What's the I mean, tell us more.
Sure. So my dad is obviously a very driven person. He had to go through a lot to get to where he is. I know a lot of the people around him, and certainly his family members, his mother and father, didn't have the luxury of going to school the way he did. So I think he really saw an opportunity in education, and of course, in doing that, he became a doctor. He was, getting educated allowed him to do what he does now and what he's been
Got it.
doing since he got here.
Got it. All right, but let's keep tracing his route. So he went from Lebanon to France. How old was he? Did he go for medical school, or how did he go before that?
So, medical school in Europe is a little bit different than in the States. In the States, you would go to a 4 year college and then you would go to medical school. But in France, you actually go straight from lycée, which is high school basically, to
Hmm.
medical school. So he started medical school when he was 17 or 18, right out of college, but then you go for 7 years after that. So it's not just a 4 year program, it's actually 7 years of medical education.
And then was he practicing? Did he practice medicine in France, or is that when he came over?
He ended up coming, my mother and he came to New York City, I believe soon after they graduated. But again, don't hold me to that. Now I feel I feel badly that I don't know for sure. But I believe they came to New York and kind of had to move around a little bit, but ultimately ended up working in New York City, and my sisters and I were all born there before we moved to Florida and then to
Okay.
Colorado.
Got it. Okay. Wait a second. You said when they moved here, I didn't quite catch what you said. You said they moved here before or after. What did you say?
So my parents went to medical school in France, and they moved to the States after graduating from medical school.
Right.
And they started, I believe, their residency in the States, in New York City.
Got it. Okay. Well, then, what was New York City like? Your sister, how many sisters do you have?
I have two older sisters and then a younger brother and sister. But my two older sisters are the ones that were born in New York City along with myself.
Uh-huh. And are they much more, because you know, we can already hear that you don't sound like a New Yorker. Are they more New Yorkers?
They certainly were there longer than I was, lifetime wise. They left when they were about 8, and I was very young. I was 2 years old when we left. So while I can say I was born in New York, I actually grew up in Florida.
Got it.
But
All
no,
right.
they
So
one
what?
of them went back to New York City and absolutely loves it there. She's been there, I think, nearing 11 years now.
Yeah. Well, there's three kinds of people. There's the people that love New York City. There's the people that love to visit New York City but would never live here. And then, of course, there are the people that just hate New York City. So there's your three types, and we're glad to have at least one Berliner with us.
My middle sister and I are the type that love to visit. I
Got it. Right.
don't
And
think I
then
could
what
handle
about
it.
your
I love
your
the mountains too much.
yeah? And then what about your younger bro and your younger sis? Where are they?
They're actually in Florida. They're much younger than I am, 17 and 14. So much younger, born and raised in Florida.
Right. And I forget that you're kind of young yourself.
Relative, I guess. It depends who's asking.
Yeah, but exactly. That's exactly. If my niece, the 4-year-old, were asking you, you're ancient. So okay, can we just quickly go through since we know that your mother's from Hungary, and by the way, when did she go to France? She went to France for school as well. Is that just straight from Hungary to France for school?
My mother had gone all over the place. So from Hungary, born and raised until the age of 11, she went to the States. She went straight to Chicago. And
Hmm.
then being a woman around that time, in the 60s, she was having a really hard time getting into medical school. They weren't accepting her. They were accepting many men that were possibly less qualified than she was, but again, because they were male, they were getting accepted much more readily. So she ended up, from there, joining the Peace Corps for a couple of years, and then realizing that in order for her to get accepted to medical school, she may have a better chance if she goes to France and does the 7-year program, versus doing it in the States. So that's when she went back to Europe, was there for quite a bit of time with my dad, and then they came back to the States together.
Got it. Okay. And so does she consider herself American or no? Because I mean, she came over early, I guess, right? Or how does she feel about that whole thing?
She she is an American citizen. In fact, she's actually working to get dual citizenship again in case she ever wants to go back. But she would say she's Hungarian, a Hungarian
Okay.
American, not an American Hungarian.
Got it. It's that way, please and thank you. Okay. And so then the etymology of Berliner, which would make me think, and I would imagine others feel like your heritage would probably run through Germany at some point.
Well, Berliner is my married name. My maiden name is Sroor, which is a very Lebanese name.
Aha.
But like I said, my married name is Berliner, also
Aha.
unusual because my husband's family is a Jewish family as well.
Okay.
So I gave up my old name and upgraded since no one could ever possibly say my maiden name. Berliner was a nice change.
Got it. And then how do you spell that maiden name?
It was SRUR.
Sure. So yeah, that's impossible. And I love how you
It's
put it in the
impossible.
past. Yeah, you put it in the past tense. It was spelled this way. You know, so that's good. I mean, your dad, I'm sure, still does spell it that way, but whatever.
Uh-huh.
That's neither here nor there, and probably your brother,
Touche.
but whatever.
It is still spelled that way. You caught
All
me.
right, so good. All right, so then Florida. What? Why Florida? Say it again, huh?
I think my parents spent a few too many brutal winters in New York, and one
Right.
winter they happened to go visit my uncle, my father's brother, in Florida, and it was beautifully sunny and just amazing, and they pretty much decided then and there to move south where it was warmer.
When which city roughly around?
We grew up in Sarasota, the west coast of
Uh-huh.
Florida.
Got it. And Sarasota, of course, is known as the Beirut of the states. So,
Right, of course.
so then you sound more like Floridian. You know what I mean? You sound very nice. You sound very, relaxed. Is that where you think, you spent your formative years there? Of course. What did you take out of Florida? What were the lessons learned there?
Well, it also became another one of those places that I love to visit. But upon moving to Colorado, of course, I fell in love with things that I could have never fallen in love with in Florida. One, of course, being the beautiful mountains and skiing and camping. Um, but again, I mean, Florida's a great place. I love visiting there, and the beaches are amazing. But unless you own a boat or love to golf, it's tough to be there for an extended period of time.
Got it. Okay. All right. So you're all outdoorsy and all that, and that's fantastic. But just quickly, before we leave Florida somewhat permanently for the purposes of this conversation,
Hmm.
did you bring your baking skills with you, or did you learn once you got to Colorado?
Well, the truth is, I don't have a background in baking. I had one really great recipe, and my father always loved to cook, so I would cook with him. But I never had true training in the
Huh.
baking world. I love to do it. But now my executive chef is far more qualified than I am to be in the kitchen. She's incredible and went to school for it, all of those things, and perhaps has the same passion that I do, but maybe a little bit more substance behind how she how she operates in the kitchen. So I
Got
came to
it.
Colorado and I found the recipe actually when I met. He's my husband now, but my boyfriend at the time told me the key to his heart was chocolate chip cookie, and so I found this really great recipe. And of course, it's changed over time, but that's when I began baking chocolate chip cookies was when I met him 10 years ago.
Got it. Got it.
Hmm.
You That's how you win a man through his stomach, right? You take his heart through his stomach, or something like that. I think is how it goes, right?
Precisely.
Yeah, essentially. So, all right. So then you meet this other friend, and you've got your chocolate chip cookies, and you're going to be an elementary, school teacher probably who's going to really understand the mind of the child because of your psychology major, and you start kind of helping this guy out at the store with the cookies, and then you're answering phones, and that's all before 2010. But when was the inflection point of maybe I'm not going to be a school teacher and maybe I am going to bake these cookies for a living?
Hmm. There definitely was a fork in the road there because I knew that if I took this path, the path of cannabis, that I probably wouldn't be able to turn around and go back to teaching. I knew that, you know, even if it's legal in Colorado, trying to get a job and having to divulge the information of my previous, you know, 3 years or whatever it was, I just don't think that principals of a public school would look highly on the cannabis industry, or at least being involved in the cannabis industry. Perhaps their personal beliefs are different than their professional beliefs, but I knew that if I made this decision, that I probably wouldn't be able to turn around. So it was a tough one. I also was an extremely poor, newly graduated teacher. I had no money, I had no job. So when I decided to get that license in 2010, I really put every dollar that I had into it. It cost me $1,250 to apply for the license back then, and it was a tough decision. But of course, I'm very happy that I made it.
Right. Well, there was the $1,250, and to someone that's young, it's a lot of money, but that's not as big of a decision as, again, that permanent decision of saying, okay, well, if I choose this path, this is really the path.
Yeah.
So, okay, as far as 1284 and your license in 2010, which you paid $1,250 for, what was next? You had to find a kitchen.
Right. So the rules just continue to change constantly. I realized based on these rules that I needed to find a kitchen, and not only a kitchen, but my own kitchen. So these rules actually prevented me from, like any other normal small bakery business, I had to find my own kitchen. I couldn't share it with somebody else. That was totally against the rules. So I had to be really, really creative in how I was going to make this work, because I really didn't have a lot of resources nor support around me yet. What I ended up doing actually was really special, and something that the city of Denver had never seen before nor approved in the past. I'll start from the beginning. I one day was visiting with a friend who had just opened a food truck in Boulder, and I was touring her food truck, which was actually a full commercial kitchen within a trailer. And I had this idea that, geez, maybe I can do this too. Maybe I can build my kitchen in a trailer, and let's say the laws change or my landlord decides he doesn't want me there anymore. I can, in a way, protect my investment. I can take this kitchen with me if I need to. So the idea was a semi-mobile kitchen, but the way that I was able to get the city of Denver to say yes was to show them that I wasn't driving this thing around like a food truck. I'm actually hard plumbing it and hard wiring it to the facility that I'm in, and able thus to prove that it would be inoperable if I tried to move it. There would be no power, there would be no water, all of those things. So I found a landlord who was willing to say yes to me. At the time, you'd go on Craigslist and try to find warehouse space, and a lot of the ads on Craigslist would say, no marijuana, don't even call us, like, not a chance. It's basically just front and center. People were very cautious about doing business with marijuana businesses, as they are much so today, but in a different way back then. So anyway, I found this warehouse. I had my trailer. I was able to build it on a very, very tight budget, and we actually worked out of that trailer for the following 3 or 4 years until recently, with recreational legalization. There was just such a clear need for us to expand our kitchen and do it right. And I say that in quotations, meaning not in a trailer, an actual kitchen with an actual, huge oven, and you don't have to duck every time you walk into it, that kind of stuff. So it did us well, and was actually very bittersweet when we rolled it out of the garage in March.
All right. So let's just take a couple of steps back, because you did something very unique, and you did something that was focused on, hey, if I have to move it, I will. And the parallel I'm drawing here, and I wonder if you've thought about this, is that your dad, left Hungary, left Lebanon, went to France, came to the U.S., came to New York, left New York, went to Florida. Your mother, your mother left Hungary, went to, came to the U.S., Chicago, went back to France, came back to New York. These people are mobile people. And, how much of that did you realize that similarity when you were, kind of literally hitching your business to a trailer?
It's a really interesting parallel because truly my parents had to be ready for anything, and they had to be really creative both in different ways, but they had to be really creative in getting to where they wanted to be. My mother decided, if I can't do it in America, I'll do it in France. Agility, I think, is something that was key for them, and certainly was key for me as I navigate through this new industry. Great parallel, and I'd love to think that that's something I took from them.
Absolutely. All right, so that first kitchen, you're kind of taking us through the transition from the first kitchen to the second kitchen, right?
So, right. So at the beginning of last year, so January of 2014, recreational legalization is a reality, and there are stores actually selling recreational edibles, and there's lines out the door, and it's just, incredible. To me, it was a piece of history. I visited a store, January 3rd, I visited a store, and I remember walking in, and there was literally a line around the corner out the door, just, around the corner of the building. It was so incredible, and I teared up. I mean, there were tears in my eyes because I couldn't believe what an incredible moment in history that was. And I had to buy a gram of weed, even though I don't normally purchase marijuana. I had to buy one, and just, for the sake of being able to charge it to a card and keep my receipt, and and be part of that incredible piece of history, incredible moment. So January 2014, recreational edibles are a reality, and I was getting much more orders than ever before. I now, in retrospect, in hindsight, I see the difference between medicinal cannabis and recreational cannabis, and why edibles would be so much more popular on the recreational side. And my opinion is, I'm sure you'll agree, is that when the recreational market is at least for now heavily based on tourism, and these folks are coming to town, and perhaps they don't want to purchase all of the accessories that are required for smoking. They just want something easy, and they want to participate in this historical movement the way I did on January 3rd. They want it to be easy, and edibles don't require an accessory. I mean, more than likely, most people, I should say, have kind of there's a stigma around smoking and smoking weed. It still feels unusual or, taboo, especially if you're not from Colorado and it's not normal like it is for me. But chances are they've probably been eating their whole lives, so they know how to do it. It's simple. I love
that. Chances are they've been eating their whole lives. I'll agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So I truly believe that that's what we're seeing, in the shift from medical edible, I should say, that's what we're seeing in the comparison of medical edibles to recreational edibles. These people want something that's easy to consume, a healthier option potentially than smoking, and they want something that's discreet. They're visiting, and perhaps they're in a hotel room that wouldn't allow them to smoke, or whatever it is. There was a huge demand and upward slope that I saw beginning in January, and that's when I realized, there's no way I can keep up with this unless I expand my kitchen. I mean, at that point I had just a handful of employees, and we were just on top of each other in the kitchen. It was so tight in there, and it was time to move on up for sure.
So let's just go through. So Sweetgrass Kitchen, it's obvious, it's an obvious name, but how did you come to it?
I was home for Passover in 2010, and it must have been the end of March that year or early April. But I had at that time realized, you know what, I'm going for it. I'm going to get this license. I need to come up with a brand. So maybe this is a typical process, but I wrote down, every single word that came to mind when I thought about edibles and what I wanted them to be. Of course, my edibles are sweet and they have marijuana in them. So grass, I wanted it to be intuitive and subtle and not, blazing fireworks in your face when you see the name. And then kitchen, because I figured I liked how it sounded. I debated between wild grass kitchen and sweet grass kitchen, and if I look through my computer, I bet I could find many design ideas before I landed on sweet grass.
Right. And then, of course, because you were home for Passover, you asked yourself, why is this brand different than other brands?
Than any other.
Yeah.
Precisely. Exactly.
Yeah. Why do we recline when we enjoy the products of this brand? Okay. So all right. So, but before we get to the second kitchen, let's make sure that we talk through the first kitchen and what you did learn and what positioned you for the kind of, what you're talking about, somewhat explosive growth in 2014. So, between April of 2010, getting your license, and then January of 2014, take us through those few years and the building blocks.
Well, the only way to describe it is by calling it a roller coaster. It was truly just the highest highs and lowest lows, sometimes on the same day, all the staples, I guess, of being an entrepreneur. But my first wall, the first real hurdle that I had to come across was when they required that first kitchen to be built. So figuring that piece out was a really, really big obstacle, but it certainly opened my eyes, and I was able to prove to myself that, if I can make this happen, if I can be creative in this, I can be creative in other ways, and I'll certainly be able to handle whatever comes next. And certainly what came next was that I had a supply issue. I didn't grow for myself like most edibles companies. Manufacturers are able to purchase products from many different sources. Mm-hmm. So as extracts became more and more popular, I was seeing a major shortage on the market. I wasn't able to get the flower, the bud that I needed in order to keep up with my demand. So my next real hurdle was, how do I work within the very, very small space that I had? I only had 2,000 square feet at the time, but get a license and cultivate for myself. But again, I figured it out. I had a hard time, getting the license, and everything takes longer than you think it will, and is always more expensive than you think it's going to be. But we built our own cultivation, our in-house cultivation, which really, makes me proud and allows for me to stand behind the products that we put out there. So instead of getting, trim, kind of the bottom of the bag trim from 5 different sources, I now am able to use the full flower, the full bud. It's grown in-house, so I see it truly from seed to the moment that it goes into the product. And I know, and I'm able to control the experience. I'm able to guarantee the experience, really, that my consumers have. Because we grow a single strain. We keep it as consistent as possible, in that we chose one really, popular strain that everybody loves. It's a Blue Dream Sour Diesel Cross. And so the idea is that, you try your edibles today or you try it 6 months from now, you're always going to have the same experience, even if you're eating a cookie or a brownie or a peanut butter and jelly cup. It's consistent, and you can still have variety in the product itself, but you're going to have the same experience.
Yeah,
so that certainly was.
Yeah, no, just the precision of baking. would demand, you would think, the kind of the consistency of the product of the cannabis, and you went out and made sure that that was the case, and that is not something that many other edibles or infused product manufacturers are going to be able to easily do. Not saying that what you did was easy, but there were different rules at the time. How did you decide on the single strain? I understand that you decided on a single strain, but why that one?
Well, they happen to be two of my favorite. I mean, New York Sour Diesel, just an awesome, it's a crowd pleaser. Both of them are. Blue Dream as well. It's one of those things, I guess, that you can't go wrong with. So I chose it for that reason, but also because I knew that those plants are very hardy plants. They produce well, and growing one single strain is much simpler than growing 7 strains. They
Right.
kind of behave differently from strain to strain. So that was also a major driving factor because we were limited on space. We have just one fairly large flower room versus multiple.
Right. That's interesting that you decided on the not only on the, and it is sativa, correct?
It's a sativa dominant hybrid, actually.
Okay. Oh, it is.
So,
Okay.
yeah, so it definitely has some indica qualities to it, and I like to think with any edible, truly, it can go either way. If you want to sit and enjoy a movie or a documentary, it's really great for that. But if you want to take it and go on a hike or go to an art museum, also an incredible way to do that as well.
There you go. And you also did it for the I interrupted myself. You also did it for the agriculture reason of the way that it grows.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are
All
certain
right. So
strains that are just more temperamental, and this one is a bit easier.
got it. I would ask the question, what breed of dog do you think that it most closely rivals? But that's a ridiculous question.
That would be tough for me to say.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get a different person in for that. But the second kitchen now. Now I think we're ready for it. You've got your single strain, you've got your cultivation, you've got your grow. Everything's precise. You're rolling. You go into the store January 3rd. You say, okay, now I get it. Rec is different than medical. Adult use has a different audience. So take us through now, kind of graduating to your next kitchen.
So, it was easy for me to recognize, and I am a believer in admitting when I don't know what I don't know, and one of those things, of course, is producing baked goods on a very large scale, which is what we now do. So, what I decided to do is actually contract a professional, someone who is a veteran in the baking world. He's actually considered a master chef and even coached the American Olympic baking team. Who knew there was even such a thing? But there is. He did that, and he's a really incredible guy. He's also been contracted to do Whole Foods bakehouses around America, and he happens to be straight from France, which of course I loved. So
Yes, of course.
anyway, he flew
Wait,
out to
but before we
Colorado.
go on, I'm so sorry to interrupt, Julie. Before we go on, we have to talk about the American Olympic baking team, because what is that?
I didn't even know that there was such a thing, but there is. Apparently, you can bake in the Olympics, and believe it or not, this individual is a Frenchman, but he coached Americans in their efforts towards winning. And he is
I
actually
wonder if it's
considered
a summer sport or a winter sport, and I mean but anyway, go on. I mean, this is a master chef. I shouldn't talk like this. This is obviously an accomplished person. You brought up testing, and I want to make sure that we talk about that because the consistency of your product and the consistency of what's in it is really important to you. Take us through what you do with testing to make sure that is the same every time.
So every single one of our products are tested at multiple levels. We first test every single harvest batch, and we're testing multiple samples throughout the harvest. So we test the flour first, and then from there we infuse the flour into our butter, and then we test the butter. And that test is what truly indicates how much product we can put into each recipe. So once we get that number, we basically get milligrams of active THC per gram result. And from there, based on our yield, it's very basic math actually. We're able to determine how much of that concentrated butter goes into each recipe. So then once the batch is made, every single product is tested as an end product as well. So every chocolate chip cookie, every brownie, even though it's coming from the same exact source, we test every single thing for consistency, homogeneity, potency, all of those things.
Got it. And I don't want to get into, proprietary information, but you said it's basic math. How far can you take us in there? What are you doing to test to make sure that it's, or do we avoid that question because of the fact that we gotta sell Sweetgrass Kitchen product here?
Well, I'll keep it simple for you. When you go on to foodtv.com and you're looking for a recipe for brownies, it'll always tell you the yield. And as long as you're not changing your process every time you make that same recipe, you're going to end up with the same yield. So for us, we are very consistent about the equipment that we use every time that we're portioning out our recipes. So our yields are always very, very consistent. We know exactly what to expect when we put, our brownie ingredients together. We know what we're going to get out of it. So knowing the strength of the butter that we're putting in and knowing the exact yield that we're getting out, that's the basic math. So I guess algebra it turns out was really useful.
It turns out. Exactly. Thank goodness. But as far as the changes that you have to make or product that you can't use, how often do you have to ditch a butter batch, or how often do you have to ditch a finished product batch? You're talking about this testing. How much of the time is spent kind of 86ing product?
Oh man, it doesn't happen that often. Although I will say that in the beginning, it happened more often than it does now, because we were experimenting with new equipment. We had gone from a 20-quart mixer to an 80-quart mixer, so there certainly was a lot of casualties, which was tough,
right.
But of course, all part of the learning process. But it doesn't happen often at all anymore. In fact, it's rare. In fact, the only time we throw out product at this point is if we don't think it looks as nice as it should. Certainly not because it's not strong enough or not or too strong. All of those things are very rare. But if a brownie or if a cookie's kind of crumbly, it goes into the waste bin.
Answering the question, that's how does the cookie crumble? So you're talking about the presentation of the product and the actual product. Let's go ahead and take a minute and talk about edibles or infused products packaging. This has been quite a ride. Take us through it from your perspective.
Yeah, that's one of my most commonly asked questions. How are we dealing with packaging regulations? And the truth is, I believe the intentions and the movement that the industry has made with regards to packaging has been great. Great intentions behind it, and also I believe very effective. So while it was expensive and it basically turned our processes upside down, we had to rethink everything. I mean, truly, the labor cost was very different than the medical side. It was a tough transition, but again, that's where agility is really key in this industry, because if you're not able to kind of roll with the tides, then you won't be able to stay afloat. So
that's it.
In my case, I actually started my recreational line with a single serving chocolate chip cookie, and that was it. I only started with one product and a single serving because it didn't exist yet. So when the state decided, shortly after January 1st, that these new packaging regulations had to be put in place, I wasn't easily able to do it, but I was ready to do it. I certainly knew how I was going to do it. So I think there's still room for improvement as far as, the regulations and what our labels look like. The regulation really requires a lot of information on the label that isn't necessarily useful to a consumer, but it might be useful to the regulatory department. But because
Right.
there's just so much information on there, everything gets shrunk down, and that's why often you'll see labels that you see so much crammed into one label, because we really are required to do a lot, and more, I think, than is necessary for the consumer.
Right. Absolutely. But Julie abides. You also took the opportunity and kind of created this educational card that you just touched on, way early. You just touched on it. Take us through what that was, or what that is, for that matter.
Sure. So I had participated in a work group that the Marijuana Enforcement Division had put together early on last year to address serving size and potency. So, as I sat on this work group, I was there with other stakeholders, other manufacturers in the industry, but also the chief of police was there, the head of Children's Hospital, the director of the Enforcement Division, of course, and many, honestly, opponents of the cannabis industry were there. And what was so clear to me was that, our consumers, our recreational consumers, truly need to be educated. They need educational material in whatever form. I mean, we quickly realized that eating an edible. Let me back up. It's not culturally intuitive yet, or at least it wasn't at the beginning of last year, that you can't eat 10 servings, at once, the way that we all know, right away, that you don't drink an entire bottle of vodka. You just don't do that, because you know that
Right.
it's
Right.
potentially dangerous, or you're going to have a really bad time. So what I took from that participation was, education is really key. So I spearheaded the edibles education card, which touched on what I believed to be. Let me back up. So I spearheaded this edibles education card, which touched on 4 extremely important pieces of information when it comes to consuming edibles. And I collaborated with the folks on my work group, to really come up with these points and drive them home. The 4 points being: start low and go slow, wait up to 2 hours, actually. Some edibles take 2 hours to take effect. Don't mix with alcohol or other controlled substances, and keep out of the reach of children and pets. So those 4 points are I believe that the 4 most important things to know when you're consuming an edible, especially if you're a new consumer. So with the help of my colleagues on the Cannabis Business Alliance, we were able to put out 250,000 of these edibles education cards to recreational centers around Colorado. And the intention was that they were given for free with every single edible sale.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's brilliant. It's obvious. The packaging, you're following the rules. It isn't doing exactly what it's meant to be doing, and so you've added this other piece, which absolutely is helpful.
Yeah. I think it really has gone a long way. Now you can see even more campaigns that have started with that kind of motivation, just education. The Good to Know campaign, I think, is really powerful. They've got billboards, they've got radio commercials, they're on TV, and they just kind of give you information that you wouldn't otherwise. Good to know information. It's really intuitive. There's also the Start with 5 campaign that encourages new consumers to start with only 5 milligrams or less.
Yeah, no, I agree as a consumer. So, as far as you are concerned, we've mostly spent this time talking about Colorado, but where else are you operational now, or where else are you thinking about being operational?
So right now, Sweetgrass Kitchen can only be found in Colorado. I'm really focused on the state of Colorado because I believe that, I want to do it right in my first, I want to do it right here first. My backyard is Colorado, and until, I feel that other states have caught up, I'm not going to move into those states. But it is something that, I joke often that being in this industry is like dog years. So perhaps in 5 months, I will have had conversations that may be opening doors in different states.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. We'll leave it at I might completely change my mind in 5 months based on the pace of this industry, which is extremely fair based on how much growth you've gone through in 18 months. I mean, it's ridiculous. Your colleague Trip Kieber calls it hockey stick growth, which you've also experienced personally.
Yeah, it certainly is that. But like I said, similar to how I would recommend eating an edible if you're a new consumer, I want to start low. I want to start slow, I should say, in this industry and make sure, it's done right from the start.
Got it. Low and slow, and wait at least 2 hours before making a decision of which state to expand into next.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So we've made it to the final two questions. There was another subject, specifically cannabis as medicine, that I wanted to talk to you about. We didn't get a chance to talk about it in this conversation. I hope that we can down the line. Does that work for you at some point?
You got it.
All right. So the two final questions, they're the same questions, same words, but slightly different. What has most surprised you in cannabis? That's the first question, and then the second question is what has most surprised you in life. So, Julie Berliner, what has most surprised you in cannabis?
I probably will answer both of those questions similarly.
Yeah, a lot of people do that.
What has surprised me most in cannabis is, it's really hard to choose. Like I said before, it's been a roller coaster of ups and downs and many surprises along the way. What surprises me but also doesn't surprise me is the incredible unity behind this movement. When years ago when civil rights was an issue, the people spoke and differences were made. I mean, that's it. It was a movement of the people. It was a social movement, and it's incredible to see that paralleled in the marijuana industry. So on one hand, I'm not surprised, but on the other hand, I'm so blown away at just the incredible moment or incredible piece of history that we all get to be part of. It's truly what I love most about this industry is not necessarily just eating a brownie and getting high. For me, it's being able to have freedom to do what I want to do.
There you go.
In life, I'd say the same thing. I mean, I think what's surprising and maybe not surprising is that you never know what's going to come your way. And certainly I could have never possibly ever wrapped my head around, the idea that one day I would be in the cannabis industry, because it truly was not a possibility. It was illegal. There's no way that could have been, a goal of mine as I was, making decisions to go into elementary education or psychology. So that certainly was surprising, but perhaps not, because you can't really expect anything to go the way you think it's going to go. But yeah, I'm very happy with what I've learned in the past 5 years being part of this industry and having made the decisions that I've made.
Yeah, and I'm happy too, and many of your consumers are certainly happy. I feel like I'm going to rephrase something that you just said, and I don't know if I got the essence of it, but the way that I heard it was that you just said you can't expect the expected. Is that fair?
That's exactly right. I mean, you can't expect the expected. You certainly can't. I mean, planning is a very good habit to be in, looking forward and planning for the future. But ultimately, my mother always said this to me, the only thing you can count on is that nothing's going to turn out the way you think it's going to turn out. And she has been right time and time again. And if I think about it with this industry, she's been right on a weekly basis.
Well, right. That's the one thing to bank on is mom's going to be right 100% of the time. Everybody on earth will agree with you.
Always, yeah.
Exactly. Julie, thank you so much, for your time. Thank you so much for your story. We really appreciate it. And I'm
Seth.
sure I'll see you somewhere.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I hope so. This has been really neat. I appreciate your time as well.
All right. You got it. All right. We'll see you down the line.
Alrighty. Thanks, Seth. Bye-bye.
Julie Berliner. Sweetgrass Kitchen. Great products right there in Colorado. She's grown tremendously, and it's through the concept, at least as she puts it, of you can't expect the expected, which is a good lesson whether you're in the cannabis industry or not.